What's going on, Archons of the Crucible? This is Matt coming to you from the cast of the Archons, and I wanted to make a quick recording here about a deck that I recently purchased and received, and I'm really excited about it, and I wanted to share that with you. If you guys listened to the last episode of Cast of the Archons, we talked at length about the secondary market and its effects on the game. And we kind of established that the secondary market is kind of a neutral thing, and if people want to enjoy it, they can. And if you don't want to enjoy it, if you simply want to just open decks and play that way, that's great as well. I think it speaks to the flexibility of the game. All that being said, I talked about on the last episode about how I'm currently using that secondary market to collect deck types. My goal in this game currently is to collect one of each kind of deck type that exists in the game currently for the set. So, for example, I want to own a good horseman deck. I don't have one of those yet. I'd like to own a good time traveler deck. I currently own one. I'd like to own a good bear flute deck with at least two, preferably three bears. These are kind of things on the checklist. Epic Quest is another deck type that I'd like to own, and Key Abduction was on my list as well. And on the secondary market that we talked about, somebody posted a what looked like a really good Key Abduction deck for sale. And so I jumped on the opportunity. It looked like it had most of the cards or all of the cards that I wanted or needed it to have to be a good Key Abduction deck. And so, like I said, I jumped on the opportunity, and it has since arrived. And I've played, I don't know, probably 8 or so games on the Crucible with it over the last 2-3 days while I was waiting for it to arrive in the post. And it's actually done really well. I think it's won, I don't know, 5 or 6 out of the 8 or 9 games that I've played. And it's a really interesting deck because it is a deck that while you're playing feels like you're losing the entire time. And then out of nowhere, I've been able to pull off victories, forging kind of 2 keys back to back. On back-to-back turns. It's been super fun in that way to kind of sneak up on people and kind of snatch the victory out from underneath them. So it's an interesting deck. It plays a little bit differently than most decks that I've played. So it's, again, part of the fun of this game is the variety that you can have, right? So I guess let's jump into it. And there we go. So, yeah, we'll jump into it. First of all, we'll talk about the ADHD scores really quickly. So the Archon name of this deck is called Herr a Palatos. It is a Mars Logos Sanctum deck. And each of the houses in this deck kind of lends itself pretty well to the overall strategy of the game. And I'll kind of go through that and explain that in a moment. So it's got 15 creatures, 17 actions, 3 artifacts, 1 upgrade. And as you can see on the top left corner of your screen here, the ADHD ratings, you're seeing a lot of red there. The amber control is in the red, the board control, amber is in the red, board control, and amber control are all in the red. But marginally, they're all 0 point whatever under the average. So I guess basically what I'm saying is that the deck is just average in all of those things. And then in the efficiency side of things, I think is a 3.42, I believe I see there. It's just really small on my screen here. But it's actually super efficient, and you'll see why as we go through the cards here. And it's been pretty consistent. As I've learned to play the deck, I've gotten better and better with it. In fact, I think my first 2 games were losses, and then I won probably 5 or 6 out of the next 7 or so games. So I guess we'll just go through the actual cards on the list here. So we'll start with the Sanctum. We'll work our way into Mars. Obviously, that is the highlight and the focus of the deck is the Mars stuff. So we'll kind of hang on to that for the end. And we'll start with Sanctum. So we've got Blinding Light, which allows you to stun all creatures of one house, which is very, very handy. We have One Stood Against Many, which allows you to fight up to 3 times with one character. We have Hallowed Blaster, which is an artifact that allows you to heal 3 with an action. Potion and Invulnerability, which combos really well with One Stood Against Many. It's an artifact with an Omni ability that allows you to sacrifice it and not take any damage for the remainder of the turn when fighting. And then we jump into the creatures of Sanctum. So we've got Bulwark, who gives each of his neighbors +2 armor. Champion Anafiel, who's the big guy with the taunt. Commander Remiel ×2. We've got Protectrix, which heals. Sequius, which captures. Zakiel, that when played allows a neighbor to fight, ready and fight, and a Staunch Knight, which is just kind of a big creature that gives itself +2 power when it's on the flank. So, I mean, I'm not focusing too much on exactly what all of the these creatures do, because really in this deck, although they're great to be able to be on there and reap and fight and control the board, and you can use them for that, the main goal of the Sanctum creatures in this deck is to just be on the board and be ready for the future combos. So it's good that this deck has big, strong creatures with lots of armor that can stay on the board, and we'll get into the reason why in just a moment. I'm sure if you guys are looking ahead at the cards here, you're kind of starting to get the idea. We'll jump into logos. We've got some board control with Bouncing Death Quirk. Effervescent Principle will allow you to control your opponent's amber. We've got 3 Fogifies, which works extremely well in this deck, because it stops your opponents from being able to fight on their turn. And I've got 3 of them here. So basically, my creatures have the ability to stay on the board longer than otherwise, because of the Fogifies in this deck. We've got Interdimensional Graft, which is a great amber stealing card. If an opponent forges a key on their next turn, they must give you the remaining amber. So if you end up, if your opponent ends up with, 10 or 12 amber, forges a key, they give you the rest, which is can be a huge boost in your direction. We have 2 Phase Shifts, which allows you to play cards outside of house. So you could play a non-logos card after you play this card on your turn, which for me in this deck just allows you to be a little bit more efficient, cycling through your deck, getting rid of more cards, playing more cards, and being again more efficient. Twin Bolt Emission just does 2 damage to 2 different creatures. Mobius Scroll is kind of a major combo piece of this deck. That's a card that I'm mulliganing for if I can. Early in the game, I'm digging for this card. So it is an artifact, and then as an action, you can archive Mobius Scroll and up to 2 cards from your hand. Which is fantastic, because a huge part of what this deck does is it needs to have a bunch of cards in your hand, or access to a bunch of cards in your hand. And this allows you to do that. Basically, anytime you take your archives back in your hand after you've triggered this, you have 3 more cards. So essentially you have 9 cards in your hand at that point. We have Dexter, just captures 1 when you play him. And we have Skippy Time Hog, which is fantastic in this deck as well. It acts kind of like a Fogify, in that when you play it, your opponents cannot use their cards on their board the next turn. So that means they can't fight, they can't reap, they can't use action abilities on their cards. They can really only play events and creatures and play cards from their hand. which is great because again it allows your creatures to stay on the board and longer, which plays into the strategy of this deck. So let's jump into Mars. So I mean the ones that jump out here that you're going to be super interested in are the 2 Key Abductions. That's right, 2 of them. Which makes the deck a lot more consistent. And then the 2 other big combo pieces that make this deck work really, really well are Battlefleet, which gains you an Amber and also reveals any number of Mars cards from your hand. For each card revealed this way, you draw 1 card. So if you have 3 or 4 Mars cards in your hand, you can play Battlefleet and draw in those scenarios 2 or 3 more cards. So really important with Key Abduction. I guess I'll talk about Key Abduction specifically because it's not a super popular card, but it gains you an Amber. It is an action, and it says play. Return each Mars creature to its owner's hand. Then you may forge a key at +9 current cost, reduced by 1 for each card in your hand. So if you start the turn with 6 cards in your hand, you have 2 Mars creatures on the board. You play this. Those Mars creatures then come to your hand. You now have you've played 1, so now you have 7 cards in your hand, which means that you can forge a key at +9 -7, so you basically forge a key at +2, which if there's no other effects on the board, you're looking at forging a key for 8. That's kind of a worst case scenario playing this card. If you're forging a key at +2 or 3, something in that neighborhood. But if you're doing this right, you're going to forge keys for a lot less than that. Again, Battlefleet combos extremely nicely with this because if you have a Battlefleet, what you could do is play it, draw 2, 3, 4 more cards, then do a Key Abduction, and now you've got 8, 10, 12 cards in your hand, making your keys minus, actually cost less than 6, as opposed to, paying extra for the key. At a glance, when you first look at Key Abduction, you're thinking +9 cost, odds are you're what's the point? You don't want to pay, 15 for a key. But realistically, when you're comboing properly with the cards in this deck, you're going to be able to forge keys for a whole lot less. The last major combo piece I want to talk about is Total Recall, which is why I was talking about having these big creatures on the board in Sanctum just hanging out there until I can get my Total Recall off. So Total Recall, play. For each friendly ready creature, gain 1 Amber. Return each friendly creature to your hand. So not only do I take my 2 Mars creatures and 3 Sanctum creatures and maybe a Skippy Time Hog or a Dexter, I can take 3, 4, 5 creatures off the board into my hand, gain 3, 4, or 5 Amber from that. Now I have 9, 10, or 11, 11 cards or something in that neighborhood in terms of extra cards in my hand, which again combos great if you have a Battlefleet, and combos even better if you have a Key Abduction. So Battlefleet puts extra cards in your hand. Total Recall puts extra cards in your hand as well as gains you Amber. Mobius Scroll puts extra cards in your hand, and archives cards that are important for later in the game. If I draw Mobius Scroll early, I'm putting whatever Mars cards I can get my hands on into my archives. And then I'm just waiting for an opportunity to draw a Key Abduction or a Battlefleet or a Total Recall, if I can, to kind of pull off some of these combos. Just to kind of round out the rest of the Mars cards here, I have an EMP Blast, which is great artifact control. Can kind of put to rest the kind of other major combo decks that are out there, like the Nep and Seed, Library Access, Shenanigans, etc. So I can EMP blast the Nep and Seed off the board. You just have to be careful because that hits your own artifacts as well. We have Sample Collection, which for every key your opponent has forged, you can archive one of their characters that are on the board. So it's just kind of character control. And then we have a little bit of amber or key control. So we got 2 grabber jammers, making it cost an extra amber for them to forge key. It also captures. We have a John Smith, which is fantastic. When you Reaper fight with him, you can ready a non-agent Mars creature. I have Vezima Think Drone, which is also another piece that lets you archive cards. So if I have an opportunity to Reap with a Vezima Think Drone, and I have another Mars creature on the board, I don't care what it is, I'm putting it in my archives. Or if I have another creature on the board that is vulnerable, if I have a Skippy Time Hog, a Dexter, and even like what's the 3 cost? Sergeant which one of these is it? Yeah, sorry, Commander Remiel. Only a 3 power creature. So if I have an opportunity, I might even archive him just because he's doesn't have a lot of health, and he'll probably do more for me in my archives than he will for me on the board, depending on the board state, right? I mean, if I can Reap with Commander Remiel to ready, a grabber jammer so that I can capture, Reap and capture 1 more amber, just keep them off a key or something, then those are things you want to think about. So Vezimus Think Drone is another kind of smaller piece to the combo. Doesn't work often, but when it does, it really adds a little bit of a bonus to your deck. And Yezelix Dominator, I think is how you pronounce that. Just a big beast of a creature that has Taunt, along with Champion and Aphiel, to kind of keep your creatures on the board a little bit longer. And a Biomatrix Backup, which again is another piece of the puzzle that allows you to potentially archive a card. And Biomatrix Backup has been kind of talked about as a garbage card since they ruled that if your creature has Biomatrix Backup and gets destroyed on your opponent's turn, they can choose not to use its effect. But in my experience, what I've been doing is that I've been playing it on one of my ready creatures, maybe one of the creatures that I see as a little bit expendable in the moment, and I will purposely destroy that creature. If I can put it on the Think Drone, or if I can put it on Skippy Time Hog, or one of these more vulnerable characters, or creatures I should say, I'll put it on there and then fight with it, purposely kill it and put it in my archives so that I have access to more cards for my big Key Abduction turns. So again, Mobius Scroll, putting 3 cards in your archives, Battle Fleet, grabbing you cards for every Mars card in your hand. We've got Total Recall, which with all of these big beastly Sanctum creatures that are likely to stay on the board, I can bring all those back into my hand, gaining a handful of amber and gaining a handful of cards, and then often forging keys for 4 or 5 amber, sometimes for free, depending on how well it's come down. So yeah, super fun deck. I've had some decent success with it. Even the kind of less effective, or the pieces that don't necessarily fit hugely into the combo are still contributing. Again, Fogify doesn't directly contribute to the Key Abduction combo, but it keeps my characters on the board longer so that I can pull off my Total Recalls. I've got 3 Fogifies and the Skippy Time Hog, making it really difficult for my opponent sometimes to control my board. So that's more or less it. I might jump onto the Crucible at some point in the next little while and maybe stream some games with this deck. But yeah, if I'm missing anything, or if there's any combos or ideas about this deck that you guys think is worth discussing, definitely reach out. I'm always happy to discuss the deck. We'll be posting this up on YouTube shortly, so hopefully you guys will get a chance to check it out. And thanks for hanging out. Again, I'm Matt from Cast of the Archons. This has been Herr, Palatos. This super fun Key Abduction Archon. So again, thanks for hanging out. Appreciate the time. We'll talk to you soon.